From the Fidelity Bank Foundation studio, PBS Kansas presents One-on-One with Victor Hogstrom.
This is where the personalities and power players of Kansas come to talk about their lives and careers and lessons learned along the way. My guest this week is one of Kansas' most experienced and acclaimed journalists. He left sunny, glamorous Southern California for a life and career here in the heartland. I'm talking about Wichita Eagle opinion editor Dion Lefler. For 26 years, he's been chasing down leads and breaking stories that expose corruption and injustice, speaking truth to power here in Kansas. Coming up, we'll talk about his storied career, what brought him to Wichita, and what kept him here. We'll also discuss the state of American journalism and the challenges of writing editorials that sometimes go against the grain of popular opinion. Now, this should be a fascinating half hour as I go one-on-one with the Wichita Eagle's Dion Lefler right now. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Victor Hogstrom. I'm so delighted to welcome Wichita Eagle opinion editor Dion Lefler to the program. Dion, you've been doing this editorial business, writing and reporting for several years. 26 years in Wichita, we know that.
Yes, almost 40
Total.
total, yeah.
Seasoned journalist.
Yep, it's another way of saying old.
So, how did you decide to become a journalist? What caused that to happen as you were growing up?
Well, I knew you were going to ask me that, and it's actually kind of embarrassing because the reason that I got into journalism was because when I was a sophomore in high school, you didn't have to take sophomore English if you were on the newspaper staff or the yearbook staff.
Uh-huh.
And so I was a photographer then. I had learned to handle a camera and to develop film in 4-H. So I signed on as a photographer. I was having a great time. One afternoon or one evening, I was covering a football game, or I was photographing a football game. And the guy who was supposed to write the football story didn't show up. So I figured, well, we got to have some kind of story. So after the game, I went, talked to the coach and some of the players and got the stats sheet, and I did a little write-up on the football game. So I turned that in, and the next Monday, the editor of the school paper and the advisor called me in and said, your story was a lot better than the guy who's been writing them,
wow.
So you're now the football writer. So from football to basketball and some little local paper gave me a little side gig there doing some stuff for them, and so got to college and I thought, well, you know what, I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm having a good time. I'm gonna keep doing this for a while, and so I did. And
Working for the college paper?
actually, I never worked for the college paper. Oh. I worked for the radio station.
Public radio?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a public radio station. And back then, I mean, it was not as professionally dominated, I guess, as it is these days.
Is that right?
You know, I mean, hardly anybody at the station was paid, and they used a lot of student talent to get the shows on. And so I was the producer of the local edition of All Things Considered on Valley Public Radio.
All right.
And while I was there, we won two of the biggest awards that you can win in Southern California journalism. We won the AP Broadcast Award for Best News Broadcast.
Wow.
And we won the Golden Mike. So this little student-run station at, shall we say, a not elite college. So we won that. And my junior year of college, everybody wanted to hire me, all over town. But I decided, okay, well, I'm gonna go back and finish my degree. And I finished my degree just about the same time that Ronald Reagan deregulated broadcasting.
Right.
And so that was a big wrench in my plans.
Why was it a wrench?
Well, because before deregulation, stations had to prove to the FCC that because they were using the public airwaves, that they were using them in the public interest.
Right.
And
With balanced reporting,
Well-
two-sided stories.
well, after that, they didn't have to have reporting at all.
Right.
So radio stations across Los Angeles almost immediately all dropped their news departments because they didn't have to do that anymore. Didn't have to serve anybody's interest except their shareholders. So I had to retool, go into print, and it was a bit of a change for me. I knew some of the basics, but I remember my first job, I was working for 50 cents a column inch at a little paper called the Burbank Daily Review. And I'd have a paper sitting next to me on the desk. And the reason that I had the paper sitting next to me on the desk was because in broadcast writing, you attribute quotes completely different way than you do in print.
Right.
So I'd be like, okay, comma, close quote, he said, okay. So I retrained myself for print journalism.
Right.
And kind of got some pretty good stories there. I covered a murder trial for Burbank where the guy killed his father, his stepmother, and his 8-year-old stepsister, and then argued for his own death penalty in court. It was this really strange trial. I pretty much had it to myself, and then...
So did he get his own death penalty?
He did, but it was later overturned.
Oh.
They ruled that he was not competent to have represented himself.
Right.
So, yeah.
So how did you find working in newspaper versus radio?
It's a big difference. It really is. Radio has an immediacy that no other medium can match. I mean, I could be at a scene, and all I needed was a telephone, and I could be reporting, straight into people's ears.
Right.
Newspapers were a little bit more of a. Newspapers, you had the advantage of depth, so you could, with radio, the stories are short.
Right.
Newspapers, you have.
But the
You have more canvas.
the short stories could be updated on the hour or
Yeah.
the 30-minute break.
Yeah, I mean, you could update it, as it went along.
Yes.
I think the best radio I ever did actually was the Northridge earthquake, 1994, because here we are in the San Fernando Valley in California. Everything is trashed. I was the managing editor of the Oxnard Press Courier, which was a coastal newspaper out there. And I couldn't get to work because the road was blown up. Between me and my paper, the road had exploded. So I went back into the valley and reported instead of managing editing.
Right.
And we did a little thing with the local radio station where we'd do a couple of minutes of news for them, and they'd promote our paper on the station. So I called up the station, and he says, "You're down in the valley right now?" He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Okay, you're on live." I went 20 minutes, no script, no notes. did 20 minutes on everything that I had seen on that day of that earthquake, and it was really dramatic. And so that was the best radio I ever did.
So, Dion, tell us about the fact that you worked with several papers in Los Angeles before moving to Wichita. Were you in such high demand?
Mostly it was because the only way you could get a raise was to move. The only way you could get a raise was to move to another paper. And you know, I mean, people did like, you know, my stuff, but so I started at San Fernando Sun after working as a correspondent in Burbank. I started at a paper called the San Fernando Sun, which was this weekly paper in a town that was, you know, approximately 90% Latino. And so you better be able to sharpen up your Spanish to do that. Right. And so I worked there, and then I moved out to the absolute diametric opposite of San Fernando, which was Ventura County, this wealthy coastal area. And so I was out there one day. I was working for a paper out there. It's where my wife, for that matter. But I'm out there, I'm working. I get this call from an editor at the LA Daily News. And she was setting up 14 zones of neighbor sections for the paper, these zone sections. And so she wanted to hire me to do Ventura County stuff. And so I came in for an interview, and you know, I had to give her, give them a resume. So she sees the resume, she goes, "You worked for the San Fernando Sun?" I said, "Yeah." She says, "Oh, well, okay, you're gonna be San Fernando. I can get anybody from Ventura County." So I was back in San Fernando, this time working for the LA Daily News, which was the second biggest newspaper in Los Angeles. And so I did that for a while. Then that same editor, she moved to the Oxnard Press Courier and hired me to be her managing editor. And then when that paper closed, she went north to the Bay Area with the Knight Ridder Corporation, and I went to Pasadena Star News. Well, Knight Ridder transferred her from the Bay Area to Wichita to be the managing editor at the Eagle, which they owned. And so she calls me up and says, "Hey, you know, why don't you come out here and take a look at working in Wichita?" So I was like, okay, you know. Well, I learned something really important, too late, but never interview for a job in Kansas in October, because it's the only decent month we have. So I'm sitting there, you know, we're, you know, having cigars on the porch at Mort's, and it's all beautiful and everything, you know. We got here at the beginning of January in an ice storm, and drove the last piece of the trip out to up from Oklahoma City, ice raining down on the car. Everything's frozen solid. The one thing I noticed though is we went to the motel where we were staying until our furniture came, and I noticed there was this spot on the sidewalk where there was no ice. So I investigated that. And it was where their big industrial dryers that they use for the sheets and stuff
was blowing.
Yeah, it was blowing out on. So I drove the Jeep up on the sidewalk and parked under it.
Okay.
So that was the smartest thing I did that first week.
So let's talk about the state of American journalism and the challenges of writing a story today.
Okay. In a lot of ways, journalism has changed a great deal. And some of those changes, I would say, are not positive ones. I think we are seeing, you know, I think we've seen a regression, especially at the national level, from reporting, you know, just news reporting, and that line between, you know, news and opinion. Now people want to live in a bubble. They want to live in a bubble where their particular opinions and prejudices and everything else will always be affirmed. So as a result, news, particularly broadcast news, especially broadcast news, has developed into this, okay, well, this is the channel you watch if you're a Democrat. This is the channel you watch if you're a Republican.
Right.
This is the channel you watch if you're to the right of Republicans. This is the channel you watch if you're to the left of Democrats. And it's just, it's very fragmented. And, it's very hard to get the full story. I mean, I feel sorry for, the average news consumer who doesn't have access to everything I do.
Would you say journalism has become political?
Oh, yeah. I think it really has. I mean, there's, there are still outlets that play it pretty close down the middle. I think the Eagle, as far as, the news side of the Eagle is, it's pretty fair. But, there's a lot of, and all the stuff that's online, all the fake stuff that's online, I mean, good Lord, the number of people who believe these stories, right. that are just obviously false and fraudulent, and it's like, you just look at that and you go, how can people be so dumb?
Right.
But, those things get their page views.
How much of your opinion, writing that is based on actual facts versus your own morality and biases?
Back in Cal State Northridge, I was a debater in college. And we had one of the best debate teams in the country. This little, it was a small school, or well, there were a lot of people in the school, but it wasn't a we weren't a name brand college, and there weren't even any dorms at the point where I went there. There was no dorms, no on-campus housing at all. It was all commuters, and but we won the national championship, the team national championship in debate in 1979 and 1981.
Wow.
And what debate taught me was to look at all sides, because in college debate, you argue one side, and then the next round, you argue the other side. So I really, that for me really developed that sense of, okay, there are valid points to be said on all sides of an issue. Now, when I look at a story, I think I will generally tend to favor the little guy up against the system. When somebody's getting done dirt by the government, or, I tend to, I tend to champion those causes.
So do you feel that your editorials are always right?
They're always as right as I can make them.
Okay.
It's like being a baseball umpire.
Right.
You make your call, and, it's the best call you can make.
So we play a little game on this program from time to time, and
Okay.
we have one for you. I'll start a sentence, and you finish it.
Okay.
And it's a quick round here.
All right.
The thing I like best about Kansas is?
The thing I like best about Kansas is, well, the people. The people are really what make the place. And, we have, physically this state is as challenging a place as I've ever lived. But, there are just so many good people here that really make it, worthwhile living here.
Right. The next one is, if I could change one thing about Kansas, it would be?
The weather.
Okay.
No, but I think seriously, I think the political system could use some realignment. I think that that we have, there are policies out there that are excluding people from participating in the political system, and there are functional difficulties with the state being so gerrymandered that, very few elections in the state are really contested or even, usually it's, it's one side or the other is going to win. Everybody knows it, and nobody comes. So I would like to see the state be more democratic in a small d way, and have our elections be a little bit more meaningful.
So the greatest problem you think facing our nation is what?
Oh, I think the greatest problem facing our nation is the attacks on American democracy. I really think that we need to evaluate as a people where we are in terms of democracy and where we want to be. It has changed so much since I was a young journalist, and it is, back then, you had your Republicans, you had your Democrats, okay, they fought over, elections and stuff, but you didn't see the efforts to try to suppress the other side. And once everybody was elected, then they got along fairly well, and they tried to come to consensus on things that they could come to consensus on. There was always things that they disagreed on, but things got done. And that, to me, honestly, when I saw the January 6th incident at the Capitol, that was what solidified for me that we are very someplace else, and we are headed for someplace we do not want to go.
Right. So Dion, what was or has been your memorable stories in Wichita and in California?
My most memorable story at the Eagle, to me, the most important thing that I did, I think, here, was actually out in southeast Kansas. It was the story of Treese. And Treese was a mining community where the mines played out many years ago, but the environmental devastation remained. These huge piles of lead and cadmium polluted waste just surrounded this town, and the mines had undermined the town to the degree that, sinkholes the size of, they had a sinkhole out there the size of the Astrodome. I mean, they just, there were these holes all over the place. You couldn't even trust the ground you were walking on. And there were still people living there. And they had cleared out the town south of it, which was Pitcher, Oklahoma. But because that was on the Oklahoma side of the line, they were in a different zone of the EPA than Treese, Kansas. I mean, it was originally the same city, but anyway, so I wrote, I think 15 stories in 13 weeks about Treese, Kansas. And, we got people out that, pretty much shamed them into coming out and doing lead testing on these people. And, so ultimately what happened was we got a bill through Congress that bought out the people who lived in Treese and relocated them elsewhere. And now the city has been completely leveled. Even the asphalt in the streets has been taken out. And little kids aren't getting lead poisoning now. So I felt, I feel like...
So you did some good for those people.
Yeah,
And for that area
I feel like that, yeah. And there are not many journalists who can say that they got an entire town
Right.
removed from the face of the map.
Right.
So I have always been, that was the, that was the capstone of what I think I've done here. And, you know, I think the...
In California, you covered the O.J. Simpson story.
Yeah, I was the O.J. editor for 130 some newspapers in the Thompson
really?
chain. So yes, I lived with that every day. Boy, that was grueling. But the exciting thing was we got the first extra on the street after the verdict. I had it all set up, and all I had to do was, you know, just top off that last story once the verdict was announced, strip a headline on it, we got it on the press. Our publisher, he offered a $100 bonus to the delivery driver who could get it to the downtown courthouse first. So those guys were racing all over the freeways trying to get down there. And yeah, it was pretty exciting. It was a pretty exciting day because just about the time that the talking heads, it was about an hour after the verdict was read, just about the time the talking heads were all running out of something to say, our delivery drivers got there and started handing out these papers. So they're like, oh, and here's the Pasadena Star News. It's already got the extra edition out, you know. And so that was a great day. But yeah, to get there was grueling, man. That trial was just so crazy.
So as a seasoned journalist, for those potential journalists who are watching right now, what advice would you give them? And this is in view of the fact that journalism, as we have established, is changing.
Yeah, it is. I think there's always going to be a role, though, for storytellers. It's part of our, it's just part of our humanity. It will be different. It is different. You know, it is different now than it was when I started, and it will be different in the future.
So how do they prepare themselves for this difference?
Be able to do everything. You know, I mean, you know, I think one of the reasons that I've had such a long career is that I'm adaptable. You know, and I've you know, I can do the photography, I can do the radio, I can do the television, I can do the online stuff. I can, you know, I mean, you have to be able to roll the punches. And you have to, you know, it's okay to have a specialty, but you have to be able to pitch in and do the generals too. You know, it's just make yourself useful, and you'll have a job.
Wichita Eagle's opinion writer Dion Lefler, thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much for joining
It's
me.
so great to be here.
One-on-One. And thank you for watching. One-on-one@kpts.org is our email address. That's if you have a question or comment. Until next time, I'm Victor Hogstrom. Be well, and I'll see you again soon.